So this is how we have structured today's discussion. Uh, we are going to be around with you for close to 60 minutes. The prominent theme of this webinar continues to be the challenges on implementing the ESR regulations, and that is going to be a major part of this discussion. But in light of the changes that have happened in the last 1 month, we also decided to take up maybe quick 10 minutes on talking about these changes. So the first 10 minutes, we are going to talk about the amendments and the changes in the regulations. And then over the next 30 minutes, we're going to talk about the challenges. The last slide is going to be on the way forward and the key takeaways. I'm sure you would be looking forward to that with interest. The last 10 minutes we have kept for Q&A. I would encourage and request people to ask questions in the chat box, and we will try and answer as many as possible. So on the panel today, along with me, I have Aditya Hans. Aditya is an international tax partner and leads the transfer pricing team of Dhruva Advisors in India. Aditya has extensive experience of close to 20 years on advising a lot of the organizations on matters around OECD, BEPS, and transfer pricing. He has been actively involved in advising clients in the Middle East as well on implementing their ESR tests. Aditya is going to talk about the challenges potentially companies will face on having the ESR tests done. Along with him, I have Deepak Agarwal. Deepak is an associate partner in tax, and he leads the ESR initiative at WTS Dhruva in UAE. And supporting him is Gaurav Shivare, a senior associate in our tax team. A quick housekeeping note. So if you face any technical difficulty during the webinar, please post your issue in the chat box. Hopefully someone from the technical team should be able to resolve that. If you have any questions, you have a chat box right in front of you on the right side of the screen. Please use that to drop in your questions, and we'll take it up towards the end of the session. And just a note, this webinar is being recorded, and we will share the presentation and the webinar with the panelists, with the people after the end of the session. Before we start, we want to play a quick video on why ESR. Why do countries implement ESR? Video, please.
This is Peter. Injustice drives him nuts. It annoys him that international companies and wealthy individuals are able to use tax havens to hide their money from the state. But how do they get away with it? Every company is liable for tax according to where it's based. However, tax rates in home countries tend to be extremely high. The alternative? Tax havens. That's countries with very low or no tax rates at all. When a company establishes a subsidiary, their income in the tax haven is virtually tax-free. Therefore, the company doesn't want revenue to arise from HQ, but from the subsidiary, allowing them to save a great deal of money. To achieve this, the company transfers its trademark rights to the subsidiary. The parent company pays licensing fees for this, which helps reduce its own earnings and, in turn, also the tax burden. At the same time, revenue is generated in the tax haven on which the company pays barely any tax. These subsidiaries generally only exist on paper. They're so-called letterbox companies. There are neither any people working in these locations, nor are there any offices. Indeed, several hundred companies may even be registered in some buildings. They are all bogus companies created to help save taxes. This is
as you would have heard, companies globally use tax havens and tax-friendly countries and jurisdictions to smartly post their incomes in countries and conveniently avoid payment of taxes. And in light of that backdrop, the UAE, being a member of OECD Inclusive Framework, introduced the ESR regulations last year. What it meant was that the companies in UAE, whether they were onshore or whether they were free zone, they were required to carry out an assessment of the relevant activities. And I'm sure majority of you would be aware of the relevant activities. There were 9 relevant activities which are also there in front of your screen, and the companies were required to assess whether they were carrying out these relevant activities, earning any income out of it. And if yes, then they were required to notify to the relevant authority. Apart from that, there were companies are also required to file an ESR report, which is towards the end of this year, which is where basically the companies need to determine whether they have satisfied the ESR tests, which is what we are going to talk in detail in the presentation later. Now, while the companies had filed the notifications on 30th June and were getting ready for the ESR tests, just last month, the Ministry of Finance has issued a new set of resolutions and cabinet decisions, which has repealed and replaced it retrospectively. Now, what it effectively means is that the organizations will have to again reassess their status under the new and the revised guidelines, and would have to file fresh notifications. And in the coming next few slides, my colleagues Deepak and Gaurav are going to talk about these amendments and how they're going to affect the current status. So before this, I'll just take a quick poll. We would love to hear from you on the reason why you are attending this webinar. So you can see it will assist my organization in complying with the ESR to gain knowledge, or you are here because your boss has asked you to attend. So would be happy to see the responses, please. So we have 46% people saying that it will assist in complying with the ESR, 50% to gain knowledge, and we have 4% people who are very committed employees who attended because the boss has asked them to attend. Thank you so much for this poll. Now I'll just ask Deepak and Gaurav to take it from here.
Sure. Thanks, Nimish. Thanks for the introduction and setting the stage. I think we have a lot to cover, and without wasting time, we'll just jump into the subject. So I'm sure people on this webinar who've been involved with ESR compliance, and specifically around the 30th June and few weeks before that, would have been facing a roller coaster where there was ambiguity around, do I need to file notification? Whom do I file the notification with? What is the timelines? Potentially questions all around, and a lot of confusion around these questions. So what Ministry of Finance has done now is they've come up with these new regulations which address a lot of these questions. But at the same time, there have been certain areas which people will have to be mindful of. So to start with, we will not really looking at all the changes, but some major changes that will have impact on most of the companies in UAE. Moving on, so the definition of licensee has been amended. Earlier, the definition included natural or a juridical person that has been licensed by a relevant authority. Now, the basic change here is that the word natural person has been removed from the definition, which essentially means any natural person or a sole proprietor, trust, fund, foundation will now no more be required to file an ESR notification. Just one more point is the definition also now includes unincorporated partnership, which brings us to unincorporated JVs, or for that matter, partnerships. Now, the question that arises here is unincorporated JVs potentially will not be registered with any relevant authorities. Therefore, how do they comply with the ESR regulations? That's one question. But if I were to correlate this to a VAT situation where there were unincorporated JVs which actually got registered with VAT, although they did not have any trade license, I think a similar approach would be clarified by the Ministry of Finance for unincorporated JVs. Moving to the next slide in terms of the exemptions, again, I feel this is the most important change that has been brought by the Ministry of Finance. To quickly run through this, investment funds, not really a major change. Those investment funds were out earlier, but now they've been specifically exempt. The investment management business managers who are actually doing the discretionary advisory services, those will be covered under ESR. The next bit is entities tax resident outside UAE. And I'm sure people would be aware when the notification was filed, there was a checkbox required to be ticked in terms of confirming whether you are a tax resident outside UAE. Further, there were questions around this, specifically on the Ministry of Finance website, to say, if I hold a tax residency certificate outside UAE, am I required to comply with the regulations? Now, that has been done away with. Now, tax residents outside UAE will no more be required to undertake ESR compliances. The third bullet, which is the most important. Now, before I get into that, I'm sure a lot of local companies had this question that when I have all my operations in UAE, what sense does it make for me to be covered under ESR? So I believe to cover this anomaly, this exemption has been introduced, but this is a very specific exemption if you look at it. It says you have to be wholly owned by a UAE resident. A UAE resident could be a national or an expat who is resident here. The second part is you should not be a part of an M&E group. Now, M&E has been, we've just given a definition at the bottom of the slide, but one point that is important is the group. Now, the group has been defined to say that the group should have formed consolidated financial statements in terms of the applicable accounting standards, financial reporting standards. Now, that is an important point, because we've seen there are a few countries who do not mandate the preparation of consolidated financial statements. So that's something one needs to be mindful of. The other part of this is that all the activities need to be conducted in UAE. Now, if you potentially look at any company, I'm sure there will be import and export transactions. So do I consider these as wholly or actually being conducted in UAE? So there's a question mark there. You need to be again evaluating that particular point. So that's an important exemption from the local business perspective. Coming to the fourth, branches of foreign entities. Now, basically, if the branch is getting taxed outside UAE, where the foreign entity is located, that is where the branch will be exempted from ESR regulations. The last is basically the Ministry of Finance just wanted to ensure that it keeps a window open for itself, and if it needs to issue more exemptions for any particular entity. Just two more points on this slide. Basically, if you remember, there was a particular kind of exemption for entities. Those were 51% directly or indirectly held by a government or an emirate government. That has now been removed. Now, such entities will potentially have to look at falling into the other 5 exemption criteria. The last point on this slide, now, if you are to claim any exemption, there is a strict requirement that you submit a documentary evidence. Now, what does documentary evidence mean? It could differ from exemption to exemption. So to just take an example, entities that are tax resident outside UAE. Here, the regulations or the FAQs talk about submitting a tax residency certificate, a tax assessment order. So those are the examples, and one needs to be careful in terms of submitting these documents. Now, what happens if you do not submit such documents? It's provided that you will be treated as if you are not complying with the exemption requirement, and you'll have to go through the entire notification and the reporting. However, just one point of caution here, there is a opportunity of being heard given wherein you'll have to approach the FTA and substantiate why do you qualify for the exemption. Moving to the next slide, this is around branches. So I'm sure there people would be aware there were loads of confusion around. So if I'm a local entity, I have branches in, let's say, DAFZA or DIFC. So do I need to file separate notification? Which was actually the case. People had to file separate notification for these branches. So to take care of this problem where a UAE business has UAE branches across various authorities, they've said that you need not file a separate notification. One composite notification and report will be good. Having said that, we need to just wait in terms of how this will pan out and how the Ministry of Finance will be creating its website so that it ensures relevant data gets collated at branch level as well. The other is around UAE branches of a foreign entity. Now, this is somewhat connected to the exemption. So if the branches UAE income is getting taxed outside in the foreign entity's books, then it is exempt. Otherwise, it will be required to undertake compliances. The third one is foreign branches of a UAE entity. Now, if you look at it, foreign branches are really outside UAE, are not licensed by the UAE for any business. So they should potentially be outside the scope of ESR. But in terms of the FAQ, if you look at it, they've said that if that particular branch is not getting taxed in the foreign entity's income, then you may potentially have to report this under ESR. Moving to the next slide, so this is basically around the activity of distribution business and service center business. This just broaden the scope. From a distribution business perspective, there are two changes. One is, if you recollect, the requirement of distribution business was you purchase goods from your foreign connected party and then you export it outside UAE. Now the requirement of exporting the goods outside has been diluted, as even if you sell those goods in UAE, you would be covered. The second part is that so the second part is around importing goods and physically storing into the UAE. So again, that has been diluted. Again, this is more to cover the third party shipments or bill to ship to arrangements where the goods actually do not come into the UAE for storage. On the service center business, not a very big change, but yes, the condition around the services being provided to foreign connected parties in relation to business outside, that has been taken away. Now it could be for any business in UAE or outside UAE. So those are the points which I thought I would discuss, and I'll ask Gaurav to take up the next few points in terms of lease finance and certain procedural aspects. Gaurav, over to you.
Thank you, Deepak. As stated by him, there are a number of changes under the revised regulations. And in this webinar, we are trying to cover most of the important changes which will impact number of entities in UAE. So under lease finance business, previously there was an ambiguity around whether renting of goods or an asset for a consideration will be classified under lease finance business or not. But in the revised FAQs released by Ministry, they specifically stated that renting of assets or goods for a consideration will not be covered under lease finance business. Now, what does this mean? This means that any type of operating lease will now not be treated as a lease finance business. Now, we can say that this is a welcoming provision for many licenses in UAE, because previously, based on our experience, many licenses were covered as a lease finance business for operating leases. The next point is regarding cash pool arrangements. So for the benefit of audience, I'll explain what are cash pool arrangements. So cash pool arrangements are those arrangements wherein entities within a group pull out funds into a particular entity or a bank account. And as per the requirements, they withdraw the funds. So previously also, there was an interpretation whether these are covered or not. And obviously, we said that it will be covered. But right now, to avoid that ambiguity, the ministry has clarified that cash pool arrangements will be covered as a lease finance business. Apart from this, there is one change in the reporting wherein they have stated that lease finance business, if you are undertaking lease finance business as well as headquarters business, you are not required to report under lease finance business. So it is a relief again, because previously you had to report under both headquarters as well as lease finance business. Now coming to the next slide, I'll be speaking about authority functions. So the important update over here is the Federal Tax Authority has been appointed as a national assessing authority in UAE. Now in this slide, I'll be talking about the different authority functions and what are their roles. So firstly, licenses and exempted licenses will submit their notification or an annual report with the regulatory authority. Now the moment the regulatory authority receives notification and annual report, there are certain activities that they'll do. Firstly, they'll collect notification, they'll review those documents from a completeness perspective, and they'll identify whether all the details are submitted by the licenses and exempted licenses. On receiving those documents, they will provide those information to the Federal Tax Authority. The Federal Tax Authority, on receipt of those documents, will identify whether the licensees have met the test or not. The Federal Tax Authority are having 6 years to determine that. If there is a no fraud or no misrepresentation case. However, if there is any fraud, then there is no time bar for the Federal Tax Authority. Based on their review, the Federal Tax Authority may impose penalties. And obviously, the licensees have an opportunity to file an appeal with the FTA if they are thinking that the decision is not in their favor or the FTA has applied it incorrectly. The next point is regarding exchanging information. Now, the information can be exchanged in 3 parts by the Federal Tax Authority to the competent authority. The first category is In case the test is not met, the Federal Tax Authority will share the information with the competent authority. The second point is in case of high risk IP business. So it is irrespective of test being met, the Federal Tax Authority will share the information with the competent authority. And the third point is regarding exempted licenses. So under exempted licenses, they have categorized it under two parts. If an entity is a tax resident based outside UAE, or if there is a branch who is paying tax outside UAE, in those cases only, the FTA will share the information with the competent authority. Now the competent authority will share this information with the foreign competent authority where the parent company resides, or the ultimate parent company resides, or the ultimate beneficial owner resides, and obviously based on the international treaty or an agreement that the competent authority has with the foreign competent authority. Now in this, the important point that we would like to highlight that is, based on our experience with the FTA, from VAT perspective, we know that they are very stringent in terms of reviewing data, identifying that the entities are complying with the regulation or not. So it is basically an eye opener for all the licenses in UAE to ensure that now FTA has been appointed and they are going to ensure that the licenses are complying with the regulations or not. So all the licenses need to be very careful in terms of their compliances. In the next slide, I'll be talking about penalties. So penalties, there are no major changes as such, but as compared to earlier regulations, previously there were a range of penalties given, but right now they have kept a fixed penalty. So for example, for failure to submit notification, earlier there was a penalty between 10,000 to 50,000, but right now they have kept a fixed bracket of 80-20,000. For failure to submit economic substance report or to meet the economic substance test, previously the penalty was ranging between 10,000 to 50,000 for the first year, but right now again they have kept a fixed penalty of 80-50,000. And in the subsequent year, previously the penalty was ranging from 80-50,000 to 300,000. But right now they have kept a fixed bracket to 80-400,000. And obviously this is along with the suspension or revocation of license. And if a licensee is providing any inaccurate information to the Federal Tax Authority, then they have the authority to levy a penalty of 80-50,000. Then in the next slide, I'll be talking about timelines. So the major change in the timelines is in respect of notification submission. So previously, as we all are aware that there were no timelines given for the notification submission. Like DMCC, Minister of Economy, they came out with their own timeline, and which was 30th June 2020 in most of the cases. But right now, they are specifically included under the revised regulations that any notification needs to be submitted within 6 months from the end of the financial year. So for example, if your year end is 31st December 2020, then you need to submit the notification by 30th June 2021. And also, I would like to highlight that as we all are aware that the notification for 2019 is required to be resubmitted. So the due date for that is yet to be announced, and that needs to be submitted online on the ministry portal. Apart from this, there is no change in annual report submission. So the timeline remains same, and the annual report needs to be submitted within 12 months from the end of the financial year. So for example, if your year end is 31st December 2019, then the annual report needs to be submitted by 31st December 2020. Then I'll hand over to Aditya, who will be speaking on economic substance test challenges and other conditions.
I think, thank you, Gaurav. And Deepak for bringing out the quick snapshot of the changes. I think a fair bit of work to be done by companies again on managing these tests. Deepak, I mean, although we have Q&A at the end of the session, there's a very interesting question that has come, and I'm tempted to take this if Aditya, you allow me. And I think this is relevant in the context of the discussions that we just had. It says that we have a company in UAE and we have a branch in BVI, a tax haven. Are we required to file the ESR documents and reports for the branch?
Right.
I think, yeah.
No, I think that's a very good question, and I had that at the back of my mind. So, so the thing is, if you remember, I just mentioned a branch outside UAE should technically be outside the scope of ESR. Having said that, there is an FAQ which talks about whether the branch income is getting taxed outside UAE or not. But in this point, you said BVI, there's no tax, it's a tax haven potentially. So how do I report it? Now, considering that particular FAQ, it is potentially required to be reported with the UAE entity in UAE.
And Deepak, that also kind of makes sense because ESR is all about notifying the entities which are not paying taxes anywhere. So even if you are located in a tax haven, potentially you should still be allowed required to file the report here.
I
That's
agree. I agree. Yes, Nimish. Yeah.
great. Thank you. Aditya, over to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Nimish. And thank you to Gaurav and Deepak also for setting the context. Uh, so, if you look at the way we started our discussion, it was what was the intent of bringing the regulation and who's required to comply. So, whether it's an unincorporated JV or whether it's a government company with or a company where government has got more than 51%, what are the penalties? So, all of that being discussed. But the last leg, which is the economic substance report, and I believe me, the kind of volume of information they seek, it's actually going to be a very detailed report, which is going to be sought for. If I move to the next slide, uh, we can see that it's in three buckets where the information is being sought. One is your performance test, actual performance test. The second is your adequacy test, and the third one is your activity test. From an organization perspective, if I see the actual presence test, uh, the actual presence test comes from a senior management perspective. That is the board. So whether the board is rightly constituted, whether it's got the right skill sets, whether the right minutes are being documented. So it's more around the topmost cream management, the cream part of the organization of any company. I will say not an organization which is well documented or not. The second leg which comes is the adequacy test. So if there are directions, vision coming from the board, is it being executed? There are proper people to undertake the execution. Are the proper expenditures being incurred? Are there proper physical tangible assets? So is it a simply a letterbox and a brass company, or is it a company? There's an old adage which we generally say, a man, a dog, and a bag of cash. That's all what the company has, or it's a letterbox and a brass plate company. Is it something a lot more than that? There are people, because board minutes, board meetings, they are sporadic in nature. They don't take place through the year, like every week or something. They would take place on a monthly or a quarterly, depending on the extent of operations. But when I come to adequacy, it's on a day-to-day activity. So are there enough expenditures residing in UAE to prove that test? And the last one, which is there, is the activity test. When I say activity, it resounds very much with the functionals which are being undertaken in that particular location, and the key value adding functions. So what UAE, and I will say UAE has borrowed that from OECD. They have brought out this list of 3 to 5 uh, income generating activities, core income generating activities for each of the relevant activities. So 9 relevant activities. From these 9 relevant activities, they have identified 3 to 5 core income generating activities. Uh, is it complete, comprehensive, or is it indicative? Well, it's not very clear from the regulation, but yes, I will say no one can define a core income generating activity for an organization within 3 bullet points. So I will say they are indicative in nature. So you are supposed to have those, one of those, or two of those, or all of those, or beyond those also, core income generating activities in UAE. So putting all of this together becomes the economic substances. Now, before I embark into the journey and explain the source of this information where one could find and what is sufficiency in these cases, because I think so there'll be only two questions for each of these. Where is the source? Can there be an easier source to gather this information? And what is sufficient in each of the cases? Because the information definitely exists within an organization, within a corporate structure, within a company, but it's where do you mine it from and whether it's sufficient. Before that, I would like to take a poll because I have a hunch that by the time I close, there may be a change in view. So the question is, which of the tests do you find most difficult? I'm sure all of you have embarked on the journey of trying to comply with these tests, at least culling out data, pulling out data from different sources. So is it the actual presence test, the adequacy test, or the activity test? I'll pause for a minute and I'll request all of you to put in a vote. Okay, this is interesting. So most of you feel that the adequacy test is the most difficult, followed by the activity test. And lastly, it's the, well, I'll say there's a tie, sort of a tie between the actual presence and the activity test. Okay. Let me see if I can sway your mind in the other direction. Uh, Moving to the next slide, where I will delve into each of these tests a little more. The actual presence test, the number of board meetings, whether the board meetings are physically conducted in UAE, because there's a very strict dictum that these cannot be VCs. They have to be physically conducted in UAE, hinting towards that the decision making has to take place in UAE. If the board meeting conducted at a group level or an entity level, many a times there is a consolidated board meeting which is held and the decisions are just rolled on into the subsidiaries. I hope that is not happening. What kind of a decision making is taking place? And should it be a board where you have just people coming in from backgrounds uh, who don't have the adequate skill sets? Because what a board does, it gives a vision and a direction to a company. So do they have the requisite skill sets? How well linked are they to the business? How much are they attached to the business? What is their personal interest in the business? So all of that data has to be culled out. People have voted that this doesn't look that difficult, and I do get a reason why it is so, because this is something which is not new. This is something I think so since the time I have put my foot into the international tax profession, I have been discussing this with my clients that this kind of documentation has to be there. And I will tell you where this all origins. So as we see on this slide, it's all about board minutes, board meetings, the substance of the board, the quality of decision making which is taking place at the board, the documentation around the board activities. Well, this is also discussed in another article, Article 4, which is the residency clause, and it will also be enshrined in many of the countries in the anti-abuse provisions. Like in India, it is under the POEM, and in many of the European countries also, who have affected the place of effective management regulations, which can be, if you move to the next slide, I'm sorry, but when I'm going to talk about substance, there has got to be a lot of substance and content to my slides. So it'll be a little verbose. I would want to lay emphasis on the red portion, which is shaded, which is para 3 of Article 4 of the Model Tax Convention of 2017. And even if you go back to the Model Tax Convention of the earlier years, it all had this place of effective management. It's not a new concept. It's something which has been there existing. India enshrined, and many of the countries have enshrined anti-abuse provisions under POEM. So if you see the commentary to paragraph 3, it says meeting of the person's board of directors, senior day-to-day management. And even further, if I look at the action 6, para 75, it speaks day-to-day responsibility for the management. Senior management employees exercise day-to-day responsibilities for more of the strategy. Well, this is not there. It is proposed to be included, but this is not so new. It's already there. And I find no reason why the audience also find it that this is not, rather this is the most least complex, because I'm sure, say for a company headquartered in India, and I've actually done this exercise. So a company with the ultimate holding company or headquartered in India, having an operations in UAE, I have already exercised a POEM test for the Dubai operations, and that documentation is residing in my Indian headquarters. All what Dubai office has to do of that particular group has to leverage and lean on that documentation of POEM which has been undertaken and sitting in the headquarters. So otherwise, if they would have not cleared the test, and if the Indian revenue authorities would have got a wind of that, they would have hauled up Dubai office or the UAE office and say that they are a tax resident of India. So that element of or level of documentation is existing. Although under the Indian laws, it was a lot more diluted and it got amended in 2016, but that's the way it is. It's already there. It's not a new concept. If I move to the next, which is the adequacy. So as I've explained, it's very, very easy and comfortable because the level of documentation already exists for actual presence. On the adequacy, what are the 3 criteria we are looking at? It's the employees, number of employees, the kind of employees, skill sets, operating expenses, and physical expense. Well, I don't know. I feel that I have heard of this kind of information requirement earlier as well. And where does it reside? if I look at a large MNC with a consolidated turnover of more than 750 million threshold, 750 million consolidated turnover, it is existing in the CBCR, most of it, not all of it, but most of it. Can you move to the next slide? As you would see, data pertaining to the revenue from a particular jurisdiction, data pertaining the profits from a particular jurisdiction, the number of employees in a particular jurisdiction, the number of tangible assets in a particular jurisdiction. I know it's consolidated and our ESR requirement are entity wise, but I'm sure the backup data for this would be at an entity level. So, so groups specifically who are already preparing a CBCR, at least on adequacy, I can say you are more than halfway through. You're a lot more halfway through. Well, for what about those groups which are mid-size and were not, the consolidated turnover of the group is not clearing the 750 million euro threshold? Let's move to the next slide and I will show. Well, similar, if not exactly quantifiable, but similar qualitative information exists in a master file. So hypothetically, there's a European headquartered mid-sized group which has got operations in UAE. I'm sure and they are say headquartered in France or Germany. I'm sure the master file requirements in Germany or France or a UK would have warranted them to prepare a master file. And with respect to the transactions or with respect to what is happening in the UAE. So even for a mid-size or a SME with origins to Europe or Americas or ASEAN, because master file requirement is literally now prominent across the world. Yes, it's not so prevalent in the GCC region, but I think so for companies which are operating just between the 2 to 3 GCC countries, that would, again, I agree, there's no master file requirement in barely any of the GCC countries, but the whole objective and the whole trigger point was the EU regulations and the OECD. So the master file would exist in a structure. So I personally feel, first of all, if I look at the data, it is more quantifiable, it's more quantitative in nature than qualitative. Extent of number of employees with the number of employees with the CVs, skill sets, amount of expenditure, quantum of tangible assets, it's all quantifiable. But yes, this question comes whether is it adequate, is it sufficient? In that context, I would say you should again lean on the master file and the CBCR. Reason being, if you want to approach this test on a silo basis, whether Dubai has 4 people, whether any operations in UAE have 7 people, is it adequate or not? I think so the answer would never be correct. You need to see it in the context of the overall structure. In a group, in that context, if you try to measure it, like assume a group, it's got total 50 people in the group. And out of that, 5 people are sitting in UAE and around 15 to 20% or 10-15% profits are sitting in UAE. Well, that 5 people are also sufficient. But whereas if I have an organization, a corporate organization with 5,000 people and 5 people sitting in UAE, the same 5 people, and I have around 10% of the profit sitting in UAE, those 5 people will not meet the threshold. So you have to answer this question in the context of your overall operations and not in a silo. You will find it very difficult if you're trying to identify in a silo. The adequacy can only be identified in the context of the overall operations, but not in a silo. And that's why people felt that adequacy is very difficult. But your context has already been set up in a CBCR or a master file, where your supply chain would have been discussed and it would have been told that, okay, there's a supply chain where there are 4 entities interacting and then a particular sales is made to a final customer. And probably UAE is the last link in the chain. And UAE has so many people. In that context, if you see the amount of profits residing in UAE and the number of people and the level of expertise, which is all there in your master file. So that's why I'm saying, if you look at it from a context perspective, adequacy is not a problem out here. Moving to the next slide, the activity test, where people felt that it was not so difficult. There was a tiebreaker kind of a situation with the actual presence test. Personally, I felt this would have been the most difficult because it's not a tick the box. Every business, what is happening in an activity test, it's not something quantitative which you're trying to measure. It is more qualitative which they are trying to measure. And when the information becomes more qualitative in nature, it becomes more subjective and more to questioning. So I personally, at a personal level, I always felt that an activity test is difficult. But one good thing is that for any large multinational group or a mid-sized multinational group which have cross-border transactions with the UAE, there would be adequate documentation. And I will explain in the ensuing slides why so. Moving to the next slide. So there are 9 relevant activities. I've bucketed them into 2. One is financial in nature, banking, insurance, and leasing. I put them in one bucket, which is financial, and the other bucket would be the non-financial, which is headquarter, distribution services, shipping, and the fourth one. So putting them into 2 buckets, if I look at financial, well, I could not find much in the UAE regulations, and I culled through other regulations across the world also. There was not much of density or illustrations to where I could borrow ideas. How do I substantiate that is I'm clearing the threshold for an activity test. So is it just tick the box that, okay, each of these, say banking, they've got 3, A, B, C, D. I do this, I don't do this. And is the threshold clear? No, the answer is not that. So if you see, the wording is core income generating activities. There has to be a direct correlation which I have to do. So if I have a revenue in my books, I need to correlate that with my activities. That kind of a correlation is quite an extensive exercise, but no reason to fear because that exercise already exists in your system. And where does it exist? I will move to the next slide to show that there's enough literature in the OECD, in the United Nations on financial transactions where cash pools. So Deepak had spoken about cash pool. I'm sorry, Gaurav had spoken about cash pools. Extensively, it's been discussed that where the decision making, if decision making is centralized in a cash pool, he will be the rightful owner of the most of the profits in a cash pool arrangement. So all of that, most of it is discussed, and even more, which has been discussed from the years 2010. And we as transfer pricing professionals have always applied these principles of deriving a direct correlation between the activity and the income. It is, if I move to the next slide, it's been there, and I've applied these principles. So if you look at the report on attribution of profits to permanent establishments, there is a particular chapter on banks, on financial products of enterprise engaged in global trading, asset representing the investment of reserves and surplus derived from insurance business. So the financial services sector, where the most important activity, which is the way it's measured, where you derive a correlation between the activity and the income, is key enterprise risk-taking function, the CERT function, commonly known as the CERT function. This is a concept which has been existing for the last decade, and we have squarely applied it in all this sector. We have found satisfying answers. It's just now you need to replicate this when you're looking at a SIGA for the financial services sector. Now, moving to the ensuing, and then the next slide. If I look at the non-financial sector, headquarter, distribution and service, intellectual property, these are not new concepts. I think so. If you look at any large MNC, mid-size MNC, they generally have a principal kind of a structure where there's a intangible is housed in a particular location, an R&D is in a particular location, and your other activities of distribution, contract manufacturing, they are all housed. It's all scattered. So I would read 1, 2, 3. 4 is more of a sector specific, but I would read 1, 2, 3, all of it put together. And if I look at the next slide, how would the structure look like? If I club all 3 together, a typical headquarter or a typical principal structure would look in this kind of a format, where there's a technology center R&D, where there's a shared service, where the marketing hub. So this is your complete chain, which puts together and becomes a complete organization. Now, if I move to the next slide, where has this been deliberated and discussed in detail? I would want you to show you the table 2 of your CBCR report. Here, the business activities have been discussed. So you have to put a tick the box out here, and you have already identified what activities you're undertaking. This could be a very good source where you have already acknowledged over the last 3 years, because in the last 3 to 4 years of CBCR filing, you have openly acknowledged that these are the activities I'm undertaking in each of the jurisdictions. Why not pick up your source from here? This is a very good source. If I move to the next slide. The local file. Well, I agree. Any of the countries in the GCC region, or including UAE, don't have a local file. But if UAE is interacting with any of the entities in the EU region or the Americas or the Southeast Asian, there would be a local file prepared for that corresponding transaction. And the way local files are prepared, it's not, it's not a very transaction specific, a particular benchmarking a small transaction. I think so. The Action 13 has upscaled the quality of documentation for a local file, and it's moved to the level where you discuss a complete supply chain to justify a particular transaction. If I move to the next slide, and where am I coming from? If I look at Action 8 to 10, it openly and reiterates the concept of a value chain analysis. So gone are those days when I just do a transaction net margin method and just close and justify that, okay, all is at arm's length. I am warranted now, at least in the transaction which have an intangible involved or a key value driver involved, I need to explain the complete value chain, the complete supply chain, and then do a value chain analysis and split and slice those profits and correlate that to the activity. So this correlation between income and activity is already existing in your documentation somewhere in the system. May not be in UAE, but in somewhere in the system which has got a linkage. So if UAE is part of the supply chain linkage, it's already existing out there. Again, if I move to the next slide, there's a lot of hue and cry around intangibles. And when I was looking at the SIGA points towards intangibles, I could just correlate this to the Action 8 to 10, the development, enhancement, maintenance, protection, and exploitation, whether it's a bought out intangible, whether it's developed intangible. So all of those concepts are existing in Action 8 to 10, the commonly known DEMPE. And to make life easy, I went back to the regulations, so it's always good to go to the origins of anything. I went back to those regulations or those guidance from the OECD, which is for no income or nominal income jurisdictions or preferential tax regimes. If I move to the next slide, because this is a question which very frequently comes, that when there's a controlled scenario, it's a high risk IP business. How do I cross over? And I believe even our UAE regulations are not very clearly visible on what one needs to do additionally. But the OECD has a very clear guidance on this particular. Going to the origin of this whole exercise, I found that the only extra effort which I need to do is the DEMPE documentation, the historical DEMPE. But all of that already exists in my Action 8 to 10 documentation, in a local file, in my master file. So I don't need to do that extra effort. I just need to go back and look into my existing transfer documentation, existing master file. And it is there somewhere in the system, maybe not in a UAE. I was not mandatorily required to do a master file or a local file in UAE, but somewhere which has got a supply chain linkage with UAE, I'm definitely preparing that master file and a local file. So even though I feel at a personal level that the activity test is more voluminous, but I feel it may become very easy because all of that may exist in your system if there's a related party linkage. People do get scared that if there's a related party linkage to UAE, that will be even more a bigger trigger point for a close scrutiny. But I feel that if that exists, your documentation is already 75% or 80% through. Moving to the next slide. There was a lot of discussion around SIGA, the core income generating activities for those relevant activities. After doing several of these assignments now, I thought there should be a top-down approach towards the SIGA. Rather than, putting a list, okay, in your headquarters, do you do any of these? The better approach would be, let's understand the corporate organization first. So every organization has a corporate objective. Let's understand the corporate objective first. Then the company, which is in UAE, has a purpose which meets the corporate objective, which pursues the corporate objective, that means the purpose is a subset of the corporate objective. And to meet that purpose, there'll be core functions which will be undertaken. And whether for those core functions, the business decision making is happening in UAE or not. So there may be a scenario that something may be falling in a SIGA category, but the decision making is residing in UAE, but the execution or an ancillary function of it is getting outsourced. I personally feel that even that clears. But you have to take a top-down approach. Don't take a very narrow approach of just discussing only with the UAE office. I think so. An ASR regulation is a contextual exercise, is an overall exercise where you see it in the context of your overall operations in the group, not in a silo. Moving to the next slide. So if I sum up all of this, the actual presence test, the adequacy, the activity, I feel that these are the broad categories, and you need to source your data, mine your data from these locations, from these points, data points, the timesheet, the qualification, the CVs, the number of employees, tax residency certificate, the contracts. Again, I've added the local master file, the CBCR. Again, one should also lean on the the group's compliance with respect to UAE operations, say an action 3 or action 6, how they're complying with that, a PPT, or these will be indicative tests. And I'll tell you why, because there will always be a scenario where you will fall short, and you will fall short of some of those requirements. I think so. And if we move to the next slide, and I want to leave you with a thought out here. So, reading the regulations from OECD, and again, starting from Action 5, then you go into the 2018 guidelines which have come, the EU guidelines which have come. And again, I read through around a dozen regulations which came across, which is just a replica of the other with a notch change here and there. It's all around evidence of a good conduct. So each company in a no tax or a low tax or a preferential regime is asked to prove his evidence of a good conduct, and where this whole set of information is required. It's not there in the regulation, but I had a thought that if you fall short of some of these, not all of these, say you meet 75-80% of it, and you're just feeling you're falling short of, why not also do an additional level of documentation on the absence of a misconduct? So, because see, what's the objective? The objective is that you've not set up a UAE operation or a Labuan or a Mauritius just for the purpose of fiscal benefits. If you can show that the economic sense of, or the economic benefit of setting up those are a lot more prominent or outweigh the fiscal benefits, you are showing there is an absence of a misconduct. That's not there in the regulation, but I would suggest that if you're falling short in some of the points, again, I use the word some, this is also an approach which one could adopt. Well, now that I've explained, I want to do a poll once again to see whether have I been able to change your mind in any manner. And I would want to put up the poll again to the same question, whether you find actual presence, adequacy, or activity. I don't know whether we will to sway your mind in any manner, but a quick poll to see that this explanation over 25 minutes, where I found that I help you identify the source and the sufficiency of the quantum of data which you need to collate. Does your view sway in any direction different from what it did 25 minutes back? Well, I did. I did actually. So thank you. I've been able to sway the mood in a direction. So Nimish, that's a testimony that people were, people didn't come just because the boss told them to, because they wanted to know more.
Yeah, absolutely, Aditya. Thank you so much. Really, really appreciate. I think, Aditya, you made some very, very interesting points. And if you are privy to some of the discussions we are having with our clients, that and how CFOs dread these tests, and whether they would have enough documentation and substance to prove. What I'm taking from you is that effectively everything is already there with them, either in the form of CBCR or local files or master files, and there is nothing that should be of substantial challenge. Obviously, being a new law, we will have those interpretation challenges, but I think it was very, very insightful, Aditya. Really, really appreciate. I think just last slide on the key takeaways and the way forward.
Deepak, you're mute.
Sorry, thanks, Nimish. Before we just look at this, can we have a quick poll on the timelines that companies perceive they would require to comply with the economic substance, basically the gap assessment around meeting those tests? Right. I think we've got the optimum answer in terms of 30 to 60 days. Now that needs to be kept, in context of the fact that we are required to file another notification, which should potentially be in October. That's what we've been hearing. And once that's done, we are left with around 60 days. So that really makes sense in terms of having those 60 days buffer for you to ensure you do the gap assessment around ESR. So what are the basic steps around? I need not dwell more on this. Obviously, you need to reassess your activities, potentially resubmit the notification, undertake the ESR test, and file the report. What we want to emphasize more is around how do you get ready for 20 and 21. I think, Aditya, I think you will be able to do more justice to this point. Over to you, Aditya.
Thank you, Deepak. So Deepak, today is we're sitting in the middle of September. The way I see it, there's a past, there's a present, and there's a future. If I look at the past, it's December 19. Standing today, I cannot do much. All that I can do is I can do more of a forensic exercise, because because I understand in UAE, you don't have this, the way it's across many other countries across the world, where you have to minute your board meetings and the kind of secretarial practices which exist in different countries that don't exist today, but the regulations warrant that. So standing today, what you can do for a December 19 is a forensic, evidence that there was a presence, there were people, they came, the decision took place after. So if there's a direction in which an organization is moving, it took place after the board meeting. So it's more of a forensic exercise for 19. Now coming to 20, I believe on the actual presence test, even I believe UAE has come up with they've been little lenient on because of the travel restrictions, they're being lenient on the actual presence test. They've not been lenient on the adequacy test, that is the employees and the operating expenditure. So, one can still take some leeway in the context of a COVID at my operations. People had traveled out, because I know someone, he traveled to a different jurisdiction to attend a particular marriage, and he's stuck up in that jurisdiction for the last 6 months, but he's still working for the UAE operations. So these practical circumstances, if you can document that, I think so the COVID would be a good answer, not a complete blanket answer, but yes, a good leeway to explain that why I could not. But I think so the year 21, there will be no forgiveness. There should not be any forgiveness also. You've got adequate time. You've done 2 years. You've seen 2 years. I could understand. So if I was a regulator, I would say that I will not listen to you in 21. You have 3 to 4 months till December comes. Put your house in order. And for FY20, because I believe many businesses have been affected by COVID, and this test is a year-on-year test, and if there's not been much any income, so there's an entity which is set up for relevant activity, but there's no relevant income right now. Could it be administered in a manner that you don't have actually relevant income in this year? Because nothing falls foul if you don't clear the test, because you don't submit an economic substance report if you don't have a relevant income in this year. So, people could strategize and play around between the first year and the second year, a forensic study and working around creating and giving justifications. But the year 3 is a year of no forgiveness. I think so next 3 years, people need to plan for year 21 very, very seriously. Year 20, again, I'm telling you, at least it's a hunch. I believe the world will be lenient also towards these companies, but year 21, there will be, because see, there will be a scarcity of tax collections, and then everyone will get hungry. Every jurisdiction will want more. They'll be scouting for information. Year 21, we need to get into the right, all corporates should get into the right order. That's a warning bell I can at least give to everybody.
Well, Aditya, I think this is very, very insightful. 2019 is a forensic postmortem, and 2020 we hardly have any time. I think it's a good time for companies to start looking at 2021. And as in your experience, as you're mentioning that the third year generally, wherever these regulations have been implemented, the governments have been extremely harsh. Although in the context of UAE, the tax authority, even on matters relating to VAT, has not been lenient. I mean, we thought initially it should be, but hopefully, at least for the ESR bit, we hope that that leniency prevails. Sorry, in the interest of time, now we have only a few minutes. In fact, we have short over. Maybe I can take some quick questions which have been coming. There are actually a lot of questions. So what if we do not have board minutes? There's a question, Aditya, you want to take that? What if we do not have board minutes?
See, you don't have board minutes for 19, but you can put your house in order in 20 and 21, right? And I rightfully said, what's been done cannot be undone. So what's happened is happened. So the exercise will be quite different from what I would do in a 20 or a 21. As I'll reiterate the point, it's got to be more forensic in nature. That assume particular huge amount of volume of sales happens, or I embark on a business, or I start doing business with a particular territory after a board meeting. So I just have to put in that, look, my decision making went in a particular direction. That is an evidence. Look, these people traveled. So it's more of forensic, where you put your pieces together and you substantiate. And even today, let's put all the board members who assume they are still in the system. They put in together and I said, yes, we didn't document it because there were not strong secretarial practices in Dubai. So the local requirements of other regulations didn't warrant us to do that. But I can have enough source and evidence of our travel, of a presence, a board meeting booked in a hotel. So the bills. So, in and around documentation has to be built, but you cannot take that answer for a year 21.
Yes. Absolutely. Yeah.
Again, as I said, I'm doing that exercise with you, Nimish, in some of the clients, and the way I see it's becoming more of a forensic exercise than anything else.
I agree with it. The question is, what happens if you have already submitted a notification? Do we need to file it again? I think Deepak.
Nimish, I'll pick that up. So it's very clear that you need to do a reassessment of your relevant activities in terms of the definition of licensee, the exemptions that have been granted. So you do a reassessment, look at it, where what's the status, whether you need to file a notification. Once you need to file it, the earlier notification stands, it's irrelevant now. So you need to file a new notification. So the date is just a question now. We just have to wait and see when the ministry comes out with the date.
Deepak, since the due date for notification submission has been extended, do we foresee an extension of annual report date as well?
It's a difficult question, but I do not see the need because I'm sure the regulations came in April 2019. So it's just a matter of filing the notification and doing the gap assessment around ESR. So I don't see the date getting extended.
Okay. Question, can a licensee now correct any errors during resubmission of the notification made earlier, since the old law is repealed now?
So as I said, Nimish, the earlier notification has no value now. So I don't think so the authority will go back and look at those notifications. It has to be a fresh notification. Obviously, if you make any errors there, we still are figuring out how do you change those. Should be through an email potentially.
Right. No, absolutely. And I think this is a common question. Is there any required format for the ESR report?
Right. See, the regulations are just bulleting. I think there are some 7-8 bullets which say that you need to submit these information. Just one point, they've additionally asked people to submit a financial statement now.
Yeah.
The format is not out yet, but one word of caution is financial statement needs to be, because in UAE particularly, we've seen a lot of businesses do not have financial statements that are maintained. So that's something one needs to be careful of.
There's one question for the year 2020, the deadline to file ESR notification is 6 months. What about the deadline for ESR notification for the year 2019 with year ending August 2019?
Right. So why August? If you look at March, the year ending is the 6 months expire on 30th September. But as I said, I'm sure the Ministry of Finance will be lenient around that because they have repealed the earlier regulations and come up with the new regulations. So as in fact, Gaurav earlier mentioned, we are looking at the revised dates for obviously the December 19 period. And I'm sure the March and the further other months will also come into play.
I think we already have short time. Maybe just one question, Aditya, if you want to take it. What does failing substance test means?
Well, I think so. What happens is there's an intimation which goes to the ultimate parent, the ultimate beneficial owner, and your immediate parent. And obviously that triggers a scrutiny in those countries. That's one of the points. Second, locally, I believe UAE and some countries have put in a nominal penalty in the first year, a substantial penalty in the second year, and third year, the cancelling of the license. But UAE has put in cancelling of the license from the second year, but many countries put in cancelling of the license from the third year.
Right. If the income is subject to withholding tax in other country, will I be exempt from UAE ESR? Aditya?
So, Nimish, I can take that up. So I think there's an FAQ which clearly says withholding tax in another country would not exempt you from filing the ESR. So you have to do the compliances in UAE.
What if we have board meeting in 2020 only on the phone, only company secretary and manager is located in the UAE? Aditya, you want to take that?
Yeah, well, that's a reality. And this is a reality not only in UAE, even in high tax jurisdictions like India. So I think so. The actual presence test will have the element of leniency, in which even UAE has come up with a clarification, and other countries also coming up with the clarification. So I think so. The actual presence test will not be so critical for year 20. It will be critical for year 21.
Sure. If we are not effective with the changes, do we need to resubmit the notification? Deepak, you want to take that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, as I said, the earlier notification becomes irrelevant, and that was submitted to the relevant authorities. For instance, the DAFSA, DIFC, Department of Economy. Now, as I said, there's going to be a common portal which the Ministry of Finance is setting up, and those the new notification has to be filed with the ministry.
Sure. Maybe I can just take this last question because we already have short time. Any ESR report or model or template in other jurisdictions?
No. So people who have practiced or experienced transfer pricing, there was never a template for a transfer pricing report also. If you look at the local file, if you look at Action 13 also, so it's got a list of items which has to be prepared, those 2 pages of items. And it is the consultants who put together this jigsaw puzzle and make a report out of it. Even for the ESR, there's no template per se. There's a listing of items which is there. Again, we have put together a jigsaw puzzle, and I'm sure squarely all other consultants have put together this jigsaw puzzle and created a template for a report. So standing today, there's no template for a report, but yes, the listing of the requirements is there. And believe me, across jurisdiction, that listing of requirements, because the source is OECD and EU.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
95% same.
Right. I think this last maybe it seems an interesting question. If we have 3 entities in UAE and all employees are housed in one entity, Aditya, this for you. How do we deal with it? We will be through in the CBCR as it's a consolidated, but ESR is entity wise.
If you remember it, so thank you. This is a good question.
Yeah, it's a good question. That's why I wanted to take it as the last question.
As you work up towards a CBCR, I'm sure you would have prepared your rows. If your consultant would have helped you prepare the rows on a individual entity basis and then summed it up for your CBCR. So I'm sure you would have raised the red flag at that point of level in your working paper, not on the face of the CBCR, but on the working papers. This would have already been highlighted to you that probably the income generating activities are not taking place in one of the entities, but the income is residing in one of the entities. So if there was a red flag to raise, he would have already raised it. I agree with any of the tax authorities. It's not come to surface, but your whole self-assessment, you would have seen that there is a trigger point out there.
Great. I think we'll have to end the webinar here. We have already overshot in time. I would like to thank all of you for being such a wonderful audience, and our apologies for not being able to take all the questions. Really thankful for some very interesting questions that were posed to the panelists. We hope you found this webinar interesting and informative. We will circulate a recording of this webinar and the presentation slides to the panelists. Thank you very much once again for joining us, and have a great day. And thank you to Aditya, Deepak, and Gaurav.
Thank you, Nimish. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.